September 15, 1945. Yokohama, Japan. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across the rubble-strewn streets, its light filtering through the acrid smoke that still rose from the skeletal remains of what had once been a thriving port city. 7-year-old Kato clutched a dented tin bowl against his chest, his small fingers white-knuckled around the rim. His eyes, too large for his gaunt face, reflected not just the physical hunger that gnawed at his belly, but something deeper, a profound uncertainty that seemed to permeate the very air around him. The queue for daily food distribution stretched endlessly before them, a silent river of humanity flowing toward the foreign occupiers. Hundreds of Japanese civilians, their clothes patched and repatched, their faces etched with the weariness of defeat, shuffled forward in resigned desperation. The smell of unfamiliar gasoline hung heavy in the air, mixing with the persistent odor of ash and the distant rumble of American jeeps navigating the broken streets. Kaito's mother, Emiko, adjusted the tattered cloth around his shoulders with gentle precision. At 32, she carried herself with a dignity that years of deprivation had bent, but never broken. Her husband's final letter, received months before his death in the Pacific, still echoed in her mind. Remember, Emiko-san, the gaijin are demons in human form. They will show no mercy to our people. Protect our son from their barbarism. In the charred ruins of a defeated empire, where propaganda had painted the enemy as savage demons, a simple act of shared bread would soon rewrite the very meaning of victory and defeat, leaving the conquered utterly stunned. Imagine a world where your sworn enemy, after utterly crushing your nation, extends a hand of unexpected kindness. How would your deepest held beliefs about them shatter? Drop a comment below with what you think you'd expect from the victors. The sound of American English drifted across the crowd, harsh guttural syllables that seemed to scrape against Emiko's ears like broken glass. Each word was a reminder of their subjugation, each laugh from the soldiers a knife twist in the wound of national pride. She had been raised on stories of American brutality, tales of cities burned and civilians slaughtered. The towering GIs, with their strange uniforms and alien features, seemed to confirm every nightmare her government had painted. The weight of their boots on the broken pavement created a continuous, oppressive rhythm. Their cigarettes carried an unfamiliar, acrid scent that mixed unpleasantly with the subtle, earthy aromas that had once defined her world. Even their soap smelled wrong, chemical and harsh, unlike the gentle fragrances of traditional Japanese life. As they inched closer to the distribution point, Emiko's grip tightened on Kaito's hand. The boy's stomach growled audibly, a sound that seemed to echo the collective desperation of their people. She steeled herself for what was to come, the humiliation of begging for scraps from their conquerors, the bitter taste of defeat served with whatever meager rations the Americans deemed fit for the vanquished. The temporary mess tent loomed before them, a canvas monument to American efficiency erected where a traditional tea house had once stood. Behind a large metal pot, a stern-faced sergeant with granite features ladled out portions of what appeared to be watery gruel. His movements were mechanical, impersonal, exactly what Emiko had expected from the occupying force. As she stepped forward with Kaito, her bowl extended in reluctant supplication, she prepared for the usual transaction, a quick, dismissive serving, and a gesture to move along. The sergeant filled her bowl without making eye contact, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his helmet. But then, something extraordinary happened. A younger American soldier approached the sergeant, his mess kit in hand. Private Miller, though Emiko didn't yet know his name, was perhaps 22, with kind eyes that seemed incongruous with his military bearing. He handed his kit to the sergeant, who filled it from the very same pot that had just served the Japanese civilians. Emiko froze, her mind struggling to process what she was witnessing. The young GI walked to a low wooden crate near the tent's entrance and sat down. He began to eat the gruel, the same humble, watery sustenance that had just been ladled into her bowl. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. This wasn't the generous, superior food she had expected the conquerors to consume. This wasn't the feast of the victorious, served while the defeated starved. This was the same meager meal, shared without ceremony or condescension. Private Miller looked up and caught her gaze. For a moment that stretched like eternity, their eyes met across the vast chasm of language, culture, and recent enmity. He offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, not of superiority, but of simple acknowledgement. Human to human. Emiko's hands trembled as she held her bowl. Kaito, too young to grasp the full implications, but old enough to sense his mother's shock, stared wide-eyed at the American soldier eating their food. The gruel, which moments ago had symbolized their defeat and dependence, now took on a bewildering, almost sacred quality. An estimated 13 million Japanese civilians faced acute starvation in the immediate post-war period, a stark statistic that made every single calorie a matter of survival, and every shared meal an act of profound significance. Around them, other Japanese civilians murmured in hushed tones. An elderly woman named Mrs. Sato, standing behind them in line, would later recount, "I thought it was a cruel joke at first. Why would they eat our humble food? They were the victors. It made no sense. Then, a terrible, frightening thought came to me. They are human, just like us." The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. How could the barbaric demons of propaganda sit peacefully eating rice gruel? How could the destroyers of cities share the same humble sustenance as their victims? The very foundation of everything Emiko had been taught began to crack, like ice breaking under the weight of an unexpected spring. The next morning, Emiko returned to the distribution point with a mixture of dread and curiosity. Had yesterday been an aberration? A moment of weakness from a homesick soldier? But as the line moved forward, she witnessed the same impossible scene. American guards eating the same rations distributed to the Japanese civilians. It wasn't just Private Miller. Other soldiers made deliberate choices to eat their meals in full view of the Japanese, not in some separate privileged area. She watched a grizzled sergeant share a piece of hardtack with a Japanese child. Another guard taught a small group of boys how to play tic-tac-toe in the dirt, their laughter creating an incongruous soundtrack to the somber atmosphere of occupation. The K-rations issued to American troops, while designed for battlefield sustenance, often comprised processed meats, crackers, and powdered drinks, a stark contrast to the rice and vegetable staples of the Japanese diet. This difference, often stark in taste and texture, meant that American guards eating the local rations were often foregoing their own more palatable, familiar meals, a subtle sacrifice in itself. Day after day, the pattern repeated. The guards didn't just distribute food, they participated in the mealtime, creating an unexpected sense of shared experience. Emiko began to study the GIs more closely, seeing past the uniforms to the young faces beneath. Some no older than her late brother had been when he died in the war. She observed their weariness, their occasional frustrations, but also moments of unexpected gentleness. When an elderly Japanese man struggled to carry his food ration, a young American corporal quietly helped him to a shaded area. When children cried from hunger, soldiers would sometimes offer small portions of their own meals. A declassified memo from SCAP headquarters, dated September 1945, would later reveal, "It is strongly encouraged, where practical, that occupying personnel consume rations distributed to the civilian populace to foster trust and demonstrate shared hardship, rather than perceived superiority." The whispers among the Japanese civilians began to change. "They are not devils," one old man muttered to another. "They are just men." This represented a seismic shift, a rehumanization of the enemy that challenged everything they had been taught to believe. Kaito, unburdened by years of propaganda, began to wave shyly at Private Miller during their daily visits. The soldier would smile and wave back, sometimes making funny faces that made the boy giggle, a sound that had become rare in the grim landscape of post-war Japan. Beyond the shared meals, American engineers began organizing cleanup efforts and infrastructure repairs. Japanese civilians, initially wary, were offered work in exchange for food or scrip. Emiko, desperate to supplement their meager rations, joined a crew clearing rubble from a bombed-out school. She found herself working alongside Private Miller and other GIs. They sweated together under the autumn sun, lifted heavy debris, and shared precious water during brief breaks. During these respites, the Americans often ate the same simple rice balls provided to the Japanese workers, sitting in whatever shade they could find. The logistical challenge of feeding a conquered nation of over 70 million, devastated by war, was unprecedented. Early estimates from MacArthur's staff projected a potential famine that could claim millions of lives, making the efficient, equitable, and often symbolic distribution of food a critical component of maintaining order and preventing further catastrophe. One afternoon, as they worked to clear a particularly treacherous pile of masonry, a beam shifted unexpectedly. A Japanese worker, an older man named Tanaka-san, found himself trapped as debris began to cascade around him. Without hesitation, Private Miller lunged forward, his strong arms helping to stabilize the shifting rubble, while others pulled the man to safety. In that moment of crisis, there were no Americans or Japanese, only human beings helping another human being survive. A crumpled diary entry from a Japanese civilian, dated October 1945, captured the evolving sentiment. Today, I worked with the American soldier who always eats our food. He did not speak our tongue, nor I his, but in the dust and sweat there was a silent understanding. He offered me water from his canteen. The water was cool. My heart, for the first time in years, felt a flicker of warmth. This is not the enemy our leaders spoke of, yet shadows of the past still lingered. Some older Japanese resented any collaboration with the occupiers, viewing it as betrayal of their fallen countrymen. The psychological scars of war ran deep, and even these acts of kindness couldn't instantly erase the trauma of loss and defeat. Emiko still sometimes flinched at sudden loud noises or tensed when military vehicles approached too quickly. The fear was a living thing, bred into her bones by years of air raids and propaganda. But slowly, incrementally, these shared experiences of labor and sustenance began to chip away at the wall of hatred that had been so carefully constructed. One cold November evening, Kaito fell ill with a fever, a common ailment in the overcrowded, unsanitary conditions of the temporary camps. Emiko, frantic with worry, was told that no Japanese doctors were available. The nearest medical facility was miles away, and transportation was limited. Private Miller, noticing her distress as she cradled her burning child, quietly approached. Through gestures and broken phrases, he understood the situation. Within an hour, he had brought an American medic to their small shelter. The medic, a kind-faced woman named Corporal Sarah Chen, examined Kaito with gentle professionalism. She provided basic medicine and clean, sterilized water. More importantly, she stayed with them through the night, monitoring the boy's condition and offering reassurance to his terrified mother. This act of direct, personal care went far beyond official duties or strategic directives. It was about valuing Kaito's life, a life that just months earlier, the American military had been trying to end. The profound irony wasn't lost on Emiko. Medical records from the initial months of the occupation reveal a stark reality. Communicable diseases like dysentery, tuberculosis, and diphtheria ravaged the weakened Japanese population. U.S. Army medical units, initially tasked with troop health, quickly pivoted to provide critical civilian aid, recognizing that widespread disease amongst the populace would also endanger their own forces and destabilize the fragile peace. Over 500,000 civilians received direct medical assistance in the first 6 months. A letter from Private Miller to his family, dated November 1945, revealed his internal struggle. "Mom, it's not like they told us. These people, they're just people. Kids, families, they've lost everything. Today I saw a mother so scared for her boy just like you'd be for me. We gave him some penicillin. I know we fought him, but seeing them like this, it makes you wonder. We eat their rice and vegetables now, not just our sea rations. It feels right somehow. We're all just trying to get through this." As Kaito's fever broke and color returned to his cheeks, Emiko felt something she hadn't experienced in years: gratitude toward an American. The sight of her child being cared for by the enemy melted away another layer of resentment, revealing the raw humanity beneath. Other civilians, witnessing or hearing of such acts, began to share their own stories. A new narrative emerged, cautious but hopeful, of human connection transcending the brutality of recent conflict. The revelation came through whispered conversations among the American personnel and leaked documents that would only be fully understood years later. The shared meal policy, while often implemented by individual guards out of personal conviction, wasn't entirely spontaneous. It was, in fact, a deliberate directive from General Douglas MacArthur's Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, SCAP, headquarters. Initial concerns among military leaders about potential civilian unrest, widespread disease, and the long-term failure of the occupation had led to an urgent reassessment of strategy. The policy wasn't just about providing sustenance, it was psychological warfare in reverse. A hearts and minds campaign designed to subvert deeply ingrained anti-American sentiment and lay the groundwork for a peaceful, democratic Japan. It was a calculated risk, betting that genuine acts of humanity, even if subtly orchestrated, would disarm a defeated populace more effectively than brute force. Guards were instructed to live off the land to some extent, sharing food resources with civilians where feasible, specifically to bridge the cultural and emotional gap. This flipped the assumption that the shared meals were purely altruistic, revealing a complex layer of strategic intent. But paradoxically, this knowledge made the impact of the acts no less genuine for those who experienced them. Whether born of policy or personal conviction, the kindness was real. The hunger satisfied was real. The human connections forged were real. It demonstrated the careful balance between military strategy and human compassion, a recognition that true victory required not just the defeat of armies, but the winning of hearts. The moral challenge for the American soldiers was immense. Many had just fought a brutal war where the Japanese were depicted as fanatical, subhuman enemies. Now they were asked to share their space, resources, and humanity with these very people. For soldiers like Private Miller, it created internal conflict, the duty of a warrior versus the innate human response to suffering. It was a conscious choice to set aside years of combat-fueled hatred. The ethical mandate from SCAP, to treat the vanquished with dignity, was radical for its time, especially after such a fierce conflict. Psychologically, it forced many soldiers to confront their own biases and prejudices, fostering empathy that often surprised them. Some struggled with the transition from viewing Japanese as targets to seeing them as fellow human beings deserving of compassion. For the Japanese, the psychological impact was even more revolutionary. For years, they had been told Americans were barbarians. To see these barbarians sharing food, offering medical aid, and working side by side shattered their propaganda-fed worldview. This created intense cognitive dissonance. How could people who had bombed their cities also offer them sustenance and care? It forced a reevaluation of national identity, wartime narratives, and the very concept of enemy. The ethical dilemma for many Japanese was whether accepting kindness from their conquerors constituted betrayal of their fallen comrades. However, basic human needs for survival and dignity often overrode ideological conflicts. Studies in the late 1940s indicated a dramatic shift in Japanese public opinion, with initial approval ratings for the occupation being as low as 15% immediately after surrender, rising to over 70% within 2 years, largely attributed to the non-punitive and humanitarian approach of the early occupation years, including food aid. This transformation laid the foundation for shifting from animosity to eventual alliance, a remarkable achievement in the annals of post-conflict reconstruction. Late November 1945 brought an unexpected test of the fragile bonds being formed. A massive typhoon struck the region, its howling winds and torrential rains devastating the already precarious temporary shelters and cutting off supply lines. Panic spread through the civilian camps as food stores dwindled and structures collapsed. Emiko, huddled with Kaito in their leaking shelter, felt the familiar grip of fear. Surely now, with resources scarce, the Americans would prioritize their own people. The kindness had been a luxury of abundance. Now, in crisis, true priorities would be revealed. But as dawn broke over the storm-ravaged landscape, she witnessed something that would forever change her understanding of her former enemies. American and Japanese workers, including Private Miller, were already laboring together to repair a vital bridge that had been damaged in the storm. They worked through driving rain and treacherous conditions, not just to restore American supply lines, but to ensure everyone's survival. From Emiko's perspective, watching through the gray curtain of rain, the scene was almost surreal. Uniformed Americans and bedraggled Japanese civilians worked side by side, their shared purpose transcending nationality. She saw Private Miller, covered in mud and exhaustion, carefully share his last hard biscuit with Kaido, who had followed her despite the storm. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated humanity, stripped of uniforms and nationality, revealing only shared struggle and compassion. From Private Miller's vantage point, the choice was clear despite his exhaustion and hunger. His orders were to ensure the supply route, but his heart told him something else. He saw the despair in Japanese faces, especially the children. He remembered Kaito's shy smile and trusting eyes. His own comfort and a full stomach became secondary to ensuring everyone survived. He watched his fellow GIs, many initially hesitant about fraternizing with the enemy, now actively helping Japanese families secure their shelters and sharing their own rain-soaked rations. This wasn't policy anymore. It was personal conviction forged in shared adversity. A report from SCAP headquarters would later detail the spontaneous cooperation between American and Japanese personnel during the typhoon relief, highlighting not just logistical success but anecdotal evidence of GIs sharing personal rations and going beyond duty. This crisis became a crucible that transformed tactical decisions into proven doctrine for occupation and reconciliation, a quiet but profound victory that demonstrated the power of shared humanity over the divisions of war. The immediate results of the typhoon crisis strengthened the nascent bonds of trust. The shared experience of hardship and mutual aid became a powerful narrative within the Japanese civilian population. Incidents of sabotage and resistance decreased dramatically as cooperation replaced hostility. Emiko, now a vocal advocate for peaceful coexistence, volunteered to help translate between the GIs and her community, bridging cultural gaps that had once seemed insurmountable. Her transformation from fearful widow to cultural ambassador embodied the broader shift occurring across occupied Japan. Kaito, no longer fearful of the foreign soldiers, began to look at Private Miller with the adoration of a younger brother. Their friendship became a symbol of hope for a generation of Japanese children who would grow up viewing Americans not as demons, but as complex human beings capable of both destruction and profound kindness. This shared meal ethos became a cornerstone of the American occupation strategy. It contributed significantly to Japan's rapid demilitarization and democratization, facilitating the development of what would become one of the strongest international alliances in modern history. The psychological shift among millions of Japanese civilians, from seeing Americans as barbarous invaders to understanding them as fellow humans, was critical to this transformation. Children who experienced such unexpected compassion during the occupation carried those memories throughout their lives, influencing their perspectives on international relations for decades to come. The legacy lives on today in the deep cultural and economic ties between Japan and the United States. It's visible in the thousands of students who study in each other's countries, in the joint humanitarian missions they undertake, and in the stories still told by grandparents who survived the war. Tales of unexpected kindness that often overshadowed the horror. The shared meal, initially a simple act of food distribution, evolved into a powerful symbol of reconciliation. It demonstrated that even after the most devastating conflict, humanity could find a path toward rebuilding, understanding, and friendship. In modern diplomatic circles, the post-war occupation of Japan is often cited as a model for post-conflict reconstruction. The emphasis on dignity, shared sacrifice, and human connection over pure dominance created a template that continues to influence international relations and humanitarian efforts worldwide. The memory serves as a potent counter-narrative to perpetual enmity, echoing in contemporary efforts at peace-building and reconciliation across the globe. The image of former enemies sharing a meal remains one of the most powerful metaphors for the possibility of peace. In the crucible of post-war Japan, shared meals proved that empathy, not just power, could redefine the future, forging bonds stronger than the hatred of war. What does it truly mean to conquer? Is it merely subjugation? Or is it the patient, difficult work of winning hearts and minds, one small act of shared humanity at a time? And how do we apply these lessons in today's fractured world? The story of Emiko, Kaido, and Private Miller reminds us that in our darkest moments, when hatred seems insurmountable and differences appear irreconcilable, the simple act of sharing a meal, of recognizing our common humanity, can plant seeds of understanding that, grow into lasting peace. In a world still torn by conflict and division, perhaps the most radical act of all is to sit down with our perceived enemies and share the same food, acknowledging that beneath our differences, we all hunger for the same basic things: safety, dignity, and hope for our children's future. If this story of unexpected compassion and the power of shared humanity resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. Join us as we uncover more untold chapters of history that challenge our assumptions and remind us of the enduring capacity for good, even in the darkest of times. Let's keep these vital lessons alive.